Hi guys, my name is Chad Trofgruppen, and you are watching Chad Chat. This week's episode will focus on the new version of Anime Studio Pro. So, sit back and get ready, because here's my review of version 9. Anime Studio Pro 9 has been released for about a week now. However, I had the opportunity to work with the software for about 2 months prior to its release, and that is because I was hired on by Smith Micro to produce the official tutorial set for both debut and pro versions of Anime Studio 9. So I have a pretty good grasp of the new features, plus any of the enhancements that were made to the old features. And that's what this review will focus on. I'll basically break down those features and then give you my opinion as to if it's worth the upgrade, worth your money, that sort of thing. I won't be giving out like a grade or a number as far as the quality of the product. I did that for Flash CS6 as well. I'm basically saying, here's what's new, here's what I think, and maybe you should try it out or not. So let's get started on the new features for Anime Studio Pro 9. And this review will focus more on Pro 9 because debut version 9 hasn't really seen too many significant upgrades. They were mostly reserved for Pro 9, so that's what this review will mostly be focusing on. So as far as the new features, one of the biggest additions or tweaks, I would say, to Pro 9 is the timeline. The timeline has been switched a bit. You'll notice right when you boot up Anime Studio Pro 9, if you are used to Anime Studio that is, that the copy, paste, and delete buttons have been removed from the timeline. And that is because all of the functions for these buttons are now done through the file menu or through keyboard shortcuts. So let's say you want to copy some frames, you can highlight the frames, do Control-C, Control-V, somewhere else in the timeline, quickly paste those frames and move on. It actually streamlines the process and makes workflow quicker. And that is actually a good thing. And there are some guidelines set up for this. So let's say, for instance, if you have an object on screen, you can still, of course, use your file menu commands and your keyboard commands to copy and paste and delete those objects. However, if you have keyframes selected and an object selected, the keyframes will take precedent over the object, meaning the keyframes will then be copied or pasted or deleted if you have both of those things selected. So that's just something to keep in mind. Other additions to the timeline, we now have an updated onion skin system. It's quite simple, really. However, it actually works really well. Basically now, when you do onion skinning, anything that's before your current frame will show up in red. Anything after will show up in green. It also has a transparency effect, so the further away a frame is from your current selected frame, the lighter it will appear as an onion skin on your canvas, giving you an idea of just how far away it is from your current frame. You can also do a live preview of the onion skinning now, so basically there's no outlines. You can actually see what the onion skin looks like as is with that feature turned on. And of course you still have the transparency effects to give off the effect that what you see before or after is more transparent compared to what's closer to that frame. So that's a really nice addition, especially if you're working on more complex animations. The other addition to the timeline is the graph mode has been enhanced. This is where you can go in and you can kind of tweak the curves and such for your keyframes and your object movements. Well, now you have the ability to scale upwards as well as use Bezier handles to really get in there and tweak the curves, which is really neat, especially if you are really used to working with the graph. I think this will be a nice feature for you to work with when you are working on your project files. And finally, the addition that I like the most, I would say, out of all these features is the interval settings now for your keyframes. Basically here you can go into your keyframes and adjust the speed of the keyframe to 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. For instance, if you set this to 2, basically what will happen is your animation will play every 2 frames. This gives off the effect of a lower tech or frame by frame looking animation. So the advantage here is you could have, let's say, a character animating in twos, or in other words, 12 frames per second, but you could have a smooth camera pan at 24 frames per second. So those are the advantages there. Again, it kind of gives you a clash of low tech versus new tech in terms of, I guess, the visual appeal. And it's something that traditional animators may want to look into because I'm sure traditional animators are used to animating in twos or threes and so on. So I think that's a new addition that many people will find to be worthwhile as far as upgrades are concerned for version 9. Now moving on to the bone system. The bones have seen an upgrade as well. The biggest feature, I would say, is the new smartphones system, which basically allows you to go into a bone and make adjustments through actions so that you can correct mistakes the bone may come up as far as errors and such. So like for instance, if you bend the arm or if you bend a bone a certain way, you may notice that the bend will kind of distort at the bend point. It'll kind of maybe sink in a bit. Well, with the actions panel, you can now create an action and name it the same name as the bone, and then go into that action and adjust the vector curvature or point and basically fix the curve so that now when you bend the bone a certain way, as for instance when you bend it with the way you set up the action, it will now auto-correct itself basically so that you don't have to worry about those distortions, which again is very useful. Along those lines, you now have the ability to easily control vector graphics, or layers I should say, through the use of dials. You can set up a system of dials and you can control, let's say for instance, an eye movement. You can control the lids, you can control the pupil movement, all through bones. You basically set it up so it's a dial. So if you go all the way to the left, the eye will close. Go all the way to the right, the eye will open. And you can do, of course, everything in between that then to give you a very smooth looking animation. So those are some of the additions for the bone system. Another feature worth mentioning is the new text tool. In the past with Anime Studio, if you created a piece of text, it would basically be made as a vector graphic, which was fine because you could go in and color it and you could morph it and all that kind of stuff like you would any other vector graphic. However, there was the disadvantage of not being able to go back in and add more text or change the text or the font and so on. Well, now you have the ability to either make it a text layer, which allows you to change the font and the color and the text and all that, or you can create a vector layer like before. So that gives you some flexibility when working with text. And the last major upgrade I would say is the new blend morphs feature, which basically allows you to set up actions through the actions panel. It kind of works like the smart bones feature, but here it's useful because you can create seamless head turns essentially. And there's actually an example that comes with Anime Studio you can look at when you download this new version. It basically, again, allows you to create seamless head movements, and you map it all to actions in your actions panel. So again, that's a new feature that I'm sure many of you will find useful, especially if you're looking to enhance the flow or the realism of your animations in Anime Studio. So with all that said, there are a few more additional small upgrades here and there. For instance, the library has seen an upgrade. It looks better. I think it functions a bit better. It's still a little bit glitchy for me. I've always had some issues with the library in Anime Studio in the past, and it seems those issues are still there. Sometimes when I add something to the library, it doesn't show up, or I have to restart the program, or a folder doesn't show up when I put it into the library, and so on. There are those issues, but there is a new version 9.1 in the works, so hopefully maybe that version will correct some of those issues. You also have the ability now to run Anime Studio in 64-bit performance. So if you have Windows 7 or a newer version of the Mac operating system, you can run Anime Studio in 64-bit. The downside to this for PC users, and this has nothing to do with Smith Micro's ability to create the program, but more so with Apple, is that you can't export or import QuickTime format files when you're in the 64-bit version of the software. The install comes with both 32 and 64-bit installations, so when it's time to import or export, you'll have to switch over to the 32-bit version of the software. And the reason for this is because, for whatever reason, Apple has decided not to give Windows users a 64-bit version of QuickTime. And so because of that limitation, programmers like the Smith Micro team have to rely on 2 builds in order to fulfill both worlds, basically. And there are other minor tweaks here and there I'm sure you'll find useful in the program. But overall, I would say that this is a solid upgrade to the software, especially if you are into what I have specified. If you want to control your frame rates easier with keyframes with the interval setting, if you use the graph mode a lot, you'll find the new updates useful. If you are finding the bone tool to be a bit of a hassle as far as the glitches you get when you are bending the arm certain ways, or you're bending your bone or limb certain ways, you'll find the smart bone system to be, I think, of value. And if you're looking to create smoother animations like head turns, I think the blend morphs or the motion dial settings for the bone system will work well for you. So if you're looking to upgrade, I would consider those options before doing it, but if you use those systems extensively, I would say that the upgrade may be worthwhile for you, especially if you're coming from an earlier version of Anime Studio 8. Let's say if you have 5 or 6 or 7, I would say 9 is definitely worth the upgrade, especially since you'll get all the features that 8 has in store for you. So that is something to consider. And as always, you can go to the Anime Studio website and download a free 30-day trial and try these features out for yourself. And be sure to check out my official tutorial series that I have made for Smith Micro, because I detail a lot of these new features, so you can look at them and, again, make a judgment call if the purchase is worthwhile for you. And that concludes my review for Anime Studio Pro 9. If you have any more questions regarding Anime Studio, Flash, animation in general, if you want to be nosy and ask about my life, you can visit chatchat.incredibletutorials.com. You can fill out a question form there. I'm also on YouTube, of course, so you can leave comments and questions on my videos, or you can message me personally. I also have a Facebook page, the Incredible Tutorials Facebook page. I'm on Twitter. I have a Google Plus page, and I am on Pinterest. So be sure to check out all those social media websites to get all of your Incredible Tutorials knowledge. So anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you found this review helpful, and I'll see you next time.